City of Stevens Point Plan Commission meeting, recorded December 4th, 2023.
All right, I have 6 o'clock. We will call the City Plan Commission meeting to order. Director Konoski or Maria, do you want to do a roll, please?
Weeza.
Here.
Kneebone.
Here.
Arnson.
Here.
Beacom.
Here.
Cooper.
Here.
Rice. Here. Schulers.
Here.
7.
And everyone's here. Thank you for doing that. Looks like Maria is still having connection issues with the audio, so you get to take her duties until she gets on. Item number 2, is the report of the November 6, 2023 meeting of the Plan Commission. Those minutes and actions were included in your packet. Moved by Cooper, second by Arnson. Discussion. Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? And that is approved. Item number 3 is a public hearing and subsequent action on a request from Wayne Bushman, representing Sunrise Point Ventures LLC, for a conditional use permit to construct 5 self-service storage units on a property located at 5001 Journs Drive, with the parcel identified in your packet, consistent with Chapter 23.01, Sub 14, Sub F. Adam, give me a minute to share my the PowerPoint. And there we go. And now you're on.
Perfect. So the applicant is requesting to construct 5 commercial storage buildings at a size of 4,160 square feet. Just for a little bit of context here, so the image on the screen shows most of the subject parcel, with Gamber Johnson being the larger building located on the property. Those 10 squares along Krems Avenue, those were the 10 incubator structures that were approved about 12, 14 months ago by this body and the council. The Ameta Center is located in that rectangular parcel off of Coy Drive, and then you see the 5 proposed storage buildings located just south of that east-west oriented private driveway. So the reason for this request is not for the allowance of storage buildings on the property, the use of it. That is considered a permitted use within the M2 Heavy Industrial District. The reason for this conditional use request is if you have more than one primary structure on the same lot, it requires a conditional use permit. So next slide, you see just some composite renderings of the proposed structures, pretty synonymous with the look and feel of an industrial building, which coincides not only with the storage use of the buildings, but also its location within the city's industrial park. Staff believes that the 14 conditional use standards are met and would recommend approval.
Thank you. Before we open up the public hearing, questions?
What constitutes a primary structure? I guess I thought I knew, but now I'm not so sure. This one could end up with, dozens of primary structures? Is that?
The primary structure would be, in this case, the business of the storage units. The Ameta Center is a primary structure as well. So because there's multiple primary structures, if this was a shed being used for the Ameta Center, not a problem. No conditional use needed because it's not.
But each would be an individual purpose. Each building is an individual kind of business purpose.
The primary structure on this specific parcel is the Gamber Johnson building. It's the majority use of the property. It's ancillary to the primary use, and so that's why the lot is oddly shaped, because the Ameta Center is cut out of the original Gamber Johnson lot. So because Gamber Johnson does exist on the site, that is the primary use of it. And like Adam had mentioned, and I've mentioned, the storage units are ancillary to the primary use, and so that's why staff's recommending approval.
Okay, so they're not really primary structures.
Correct.
Thank you for that.
Then why do we need approval if they're not primary structures?
When you have more than one structure on a parcel, it does require a conditional use permit.
All right, I'll buy that.
Primary structures. If Gamber Johnson wanted to put up a storage shed, they don't need a conditional use permit for that, because that's an accessory structure.
So historically, we've required for, especially like cold storage buildings, not that long ago, we had approved one off of Hoffman Drive. Mm-hmm. We had gone through the conditional use permit process as well, because there were two or three cold storage units on that. So it's, I guess, borderline precedent, but also because you have multiple uses on this specific property, it makes sense to go through the conditional use permit process.
Yeah, the uses, I think, is what I can see, having multiple primary uses. regardless. Any other questions? Yes, sir, Commissioner Rice.
Yes, just clarification. These buildings are intended to be leased out to multiple users. They're not intended to just be storage for Gamber Johnson or the
Correct.
incubator.
And Alderperson Nebone?
I'm not sure if it's appropriate at this point or not, but looking at the footprint of the Ameta Center, it's hard to tell with the scale of the map, but these buildings seem awfully close to that back wall, or the north
And the
wall.
proposal
Is
meets
there
the
enough
setbacks, right?
room?
Correct.
Okay, so just the way the map looks.
Yeah, just
makes
for-
it look too
That's the
close?
lot outline.
Yeah,
Not
I'll-
the footprint of the building.
A little bit of context. So the southern edge of that private driveway, just north of those 5 buildings, the distance between that southern edge and the north lot line of the Meadow Center is about 175, 180 feet.
Okay. Any other questions before I open the public hearing? Public hearing is now open. Anyone wishing to offer testimony on this request, step to the lectern. Public hearing remains open. And for the third time, the public hearing is open. It's a legal thing we have to do 3 times. Seeing and hearing no one wishing to speak, I will declare the public hearing closed, bring it back to the commission. Commissioners, what are your wishes? Commissioner Arnson?
I'd move to approve the conditional use permit per staff recommendations.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Cooper. Oh, I think Beacom was chiming in on a second, too. We'll give it to Cooper, though. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that's approved. Item number 4 is a public hearing and subsequent action on a request from Alex Bruder, representing Midwest Heritage Inn of Stevens Point, LP, for a conditional use permit to install an off-premise sign on an unaddressed parcel off of US Highway 10 East, consistent with Chapter 23.02, Sub 2, Sub A, Sub 3, Sub J. Adam?
Thank you, Mayor. So the applicant is requesting to replace an existing off-premise freestanding sign that's located on the subject property that the mayor just mentioned. Just a little bit of context here. Subject property is the rectangular parcel that's shown on, that's highlighted on the map in teal color, directly off of Highway 10. The Fairfield Inn and Suites parcel, that's located at the parcel just to the south of that, off of Old Highway 18. So just a little bit of context, a few decades ago when the hotel was constructed, the original plan was, as to why these are 2 separate parcels, is that the Fairfield Inn and Suites parcel would be developed on the parcel where it's located now, and then the subject property, the one off of Highway 10, would at some point in the future allow for a second hotel to be constructed on there. Obviously, it didn't happen, but that original stopgap for the interim was to construct this off-premise sign along Highway 10, really for more visibility, for more vehicular accommodations, highlighting the hotel use. So just a little bit about the proposed sign itself. It's just shy over 88 square feet in size and just under 18 and a half feet in height. So off-premise signage is, there's a little bit more layers to it in that not only do you have to meet city sign code regulations, but there's a little bit more regulations located within our zoning code, namely that off-premise signage is a conditional use here on the subject property since it's zone B5 highway commercial. And then the second matter is that the proposed sign has to be located within a quarter mile of the use that's being advertised on the sign. In this case, meets both standards, meet applicable regulations of the city sign code, so staff would recommend approval.
Again, before I open the public hearing, any questions or clarification? Sounds pretty cut and dry. Okay, I'll declare the public hearing open. Anyone wishing to offer testimony on this request, step to the lectern. Or if you're online, you can raise your hand or something, virtual hand. Public hearing remains open. For the third and final time, the public hearing is open. Seeing and hearing no one wishing to speak, we'll declare the public hearing closed, bring it back to the commission. Commissioners, what are your wishes? Alderperson Nebone.
I'll move to approve, subject to staff recommendations.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Was that second by Rice?
Correct.
Second by Rice. Discussion. Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 5 is a request from the City of Stevens Point to purchase a property located at 4213 Simonis Street and an unaddressed parcel off of Ridge Court, with the parcels identified in your packet.
Got this one.
Okay, Ryan?
So the city's Public Utility Department is in the process of acquiring these 2 parcels for the construction of well house number 12. Well house number 4, which is at east of the specific property and down in the bottom of the ridge, is nearing the end of its useful life. And so because the city is acquiring this for that specific use, it's appropriate for the Plan Commission, consistent with what we've done in the past, to review the acquisition of the property. So your purview tonight is only to review acquisition. Anytime we do any type of public improvement, it will require a conditional use permit and a rezoning for the specific parcel. So staff would recommend approval as presented. More than happy to answer any other questions you might have related to this.
Commissioners, anything? If not, I would entertain a motion. Commissioner Rice.
The future construction theoretically is going to occupy one or both of those parcels?
The south parcel. The long-term intention is to sell the home that's on the north parcel, but the owner requested that if the city were to acquire the south parcel, they actually acquire both parcels.
And is the home currently occupied by the owner?
No. It's a joint trust. The mother just moved out.
Any other questions or a motion?
I move approval of the request as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooper. Seconded by Arnson.
Second.
Discussion. Comments from the audience? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 6 is our annual housing affordability report for the permit year 2022. Director?
You folks have seen this for the last now 4 years. This is a state mandated report just outlining what it would cost to a private developer to construct a subdivision on a greenfield site. Most of you know my opinion on this report. So there's really nothing too different from what it's been in the past, with some updates as it relates to number of permits issued for single-family, duplex, multifamily developments. Again, this is something that we have to publish because we're a community over 10,000 on an annual basis. Staff would recommend approval as presented.
Commissioners?
I'll move to accept the report as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Nebo. Discussion. Hearing and seeing none.
I'd just like to add in that I do like the maps, and I think that they are useful for kind of visualizing the situation. I think early on we didn't get these maps, and maybe last year we did. But anyway, thank you for doing those. I find them useful.
Good to know. Any other comments? Again, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 7 is the presentation on the creation of a citywide historic preservation plan. This is going to be Chris, Adam?
Yep. Appreciate it, Mayor. So for the last, I'd say, 6 months or so, I've been working with the city's Historic Preservation Design Review Commission on kind of laying down the framework to start the process of creating this citywide historic preservation plan. So I wanted to spend some time and talk with you all about really, first and foremost, what is a historic preservation plan? What's some of the common themes? What are kind of the common details that's incorporated within a historic preservation plan, broadly speaking, and then what's going to be the role of you all as a commission as we start to undertake that planning process. So on this slide actually, so we talk about, first off, what is a historic preservation plan? Simple way of stating it is that it's a long-range planning document that determines policies and procedures to protect and promote a community's historic resources. This is in a way similar to the cultural resources element for comprehensive planning, except it goes The difference would be that it essentially goes much farther in scope and detail than what that element would normally require under state statutes for comprehensive planning. It's intended to really build on past procedures, past precedent in the context of preservation planning while addressing some immediate actions that we as a city will have to undertake in the next 10 to 20 years. And then really the big piece for anything preservation planning is to try to balance historic preservation with redevelopment and reinvest efforts in downtowns, commercial corridors, and neighborhoods. So the next slide just provide a little bit of context locally. So the whole concept of creating preservation plans amongst communities is, I'd say, a relatively new-ish process. It's definitely been gaining steam over the last few years. So on the slides here, I show just copies of some recently adopted plans from other local communities, City of Madison, City of Racine, and City of Des Moines. I did link those 3 plans within the memorandum to you, just again to provide some context as to what's the full scope of those planning documents. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what are some of the common themes, the common talking points within preservation plans. Now, I'll just state first with a caveat is that, of course, what's ultimately going to be included for the city's historic preservation plan is going to be based off of the public participatory process that takes place in the months ahead. But just generally speaking, the things that you see on the slide and within the agenda packet touch on some of those frequently mentioned topics. So education, advocacy, outreach, providing financial incentives, tying in preservation planning with local tourism efforts, collaboration with like-minded organizations, things like that. Really, the role of this plan commission, and I think you might be thinking to yourself, hey, Adam, this might sound like a cool idea, but what's my role, right? The short answer is that our local historic preservation ordinance, on the next slide, basically it says that in creating a preservation plan, it needs approval from this commission alongside our Historic Preservation Commission and the council. So as we start this planning process this month, it's only right for you all to have a understanding of this planning effort, and then you can be made aware of some of the actions that will take place in the months ahead. So specifically, what's going to be the role of the Plan Commission through this process is that there's going to naturally be that overlap, that coordination that will take place between preservation planning and then with zoning, land use policies, growth management techniques. So on the slide here, I gave a few examples as to what are some examples of that common theme. So talking about density regulations, making sure that for density regulations, what's allowed within a specific zoning district coincides with really the built environment of an existing area. Likewise with height allowances, minimum off-street parking requirements, connecting the need for preserving historic homes with the housing element of a community's comprehensive plan, trying to address, like we see in the downtown now, that there's some storefronts, that there's some downtown buildings where there's vacant second-story apartments. What are ways that we can try to meet the housing element of the city's comprehensive plan and making those occupiable while still being in alignment with our city historic preservation, our preservation efforts. And then lastly, really the big one, internal consistency and managing conflicting goals. So really making sure that whatever goals are addressed from a preservation standpoint coincides with some of our other long-term planning documents. Director mentioned the target area master plan for the downtown would be a perfect example of making sure that those possible conflicting goals are addressed within those two different areas. Next slide, and this is the last slide, just provide a rough project timeline to kind of get you aware of what's going to be happening down the road. It's really starting from more field work through early spring, and then spring and early summer will be more of the public engagement piece, having surveys, public workshops, stakeholder meetings, things like that. So again, this is more so just a rough just an introductory of some of the efforts that will be taking place in the months ahead. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, if you have questions or want to be involved in the weeks ahead, feel free to let me know.
I guess I have a bit of a question on the process a little bit, and just for clarification. So we have a city ordinance for historic preservation, and so there's that, and that's basically what the Historic Preservation Committee uses to make their decision. But then the purpose of the plan would provide a kind of more extensive, overreaching guidance for the committee and the plan, essentially?
Correct. Yeah, essentially it's going to be a helpful, really, that guiding document for the commission and for city staff as to what are some priorities to pursue in the
Is the
years
ordinance going to be changed, updated, or is it just going to be focused, I guess, by the plan?
I mean, naturally, there may very well be amendments proposed in the plan for our local preservation ordinance, such as, what's the adoption procedure for certain things, such as, say, creating a new historic district. But by and large, the process of creating the plan that's currently in our preservation ordinance, that won't change at all.
Yes, sir, Mr. Schuler.
I just want to say I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'm pretty sure Pete meant overarching and not overreaching.
We'll go with
I
that.
gotcha.
Okay.
Might have been Freudian.
A little bit of both.
But,
Thanks. I'm glad
but it's
someone's
important to
keeping tabs on
remember,
it.
too, I mean, those of us that have been here a while, we have 2 historic districts in the downtown area, but there's plenty of other historically significant properties throughout the city. And, I mean, we need to update our inventory to make sure that we're acknowledging those sites, and then work. I mean, maybe someday we'll have a South Side Historic District.
Yeah, to give a good example, so as the mayor mentioned, we have districts that are essentially created as being eligible for listing onto the National Register as having certain historic attributes associated with it, but they're not a local historic district, so they're not governed by our Historic Preservation Commission. One of the things that I foresee being discussed in the plan is having conversations with those property owners in those proposed historic districts. If they don't want to be in a local historic district, what are some other alternatives that can be done so that you're not subject to review by our Preservation Commission, but there are some safeguards in place to make sure that, say, a large-scale addition doesn't take place on a historic building. A form-based overlay could be possibly one example.
And the timeline's a draft, too. If we need more time on any particular topic, obviously, we'll take that.
Yeah.
All right.
A quick question. If you create a new historic district, do property owners within it have the option of excluding themselves from the regulations and guidelines for it?
No, and this is actually something I had a good conversation with a couple of weeks ago with one of our preservation commissioners, is that there's not anything written in our ordinance that says, all property owners have to agree to be on to be within a historic district or a certain percentage. And that's ultimately going to be a big one component of the public engagement piece is see, is there an appetite for being in a historic district? Of course, we as staff, that is a significantly important piece of information to know, right? We don't want to necessarily propose a historic district if there's not support from individual property owners. So
during that process too, Commissioner, we'd be able to take input from property owners. So if we deem that, right, maybe your particular property doesn't meet the criteria for being historic, we could in some cases shift the boundary of the historic district around that block, or, well, generally you're not going to do specific properties, but we had that happen when we created the most recent historic district. there are residences in there that, under most everybody's definition, wouldn't qualify as being historic or historically significant, yet they're included in the boundary. So I would expect that the Historic Preservation and Design Review Commission going forward would recognize that, yes, it's in the historic district, but this one isn't particularly historic. So if you wanted to put vinyl windows on your residence, it'd probably be allowed. Does that make sense?
Is there a
Yeah,
way
thank
that
you.
that could be established beforehand?
Not really. We can put some things in there maybe that would say, this particular property currently doesn't have enough historic significance, but
Could you define criteria that would allow a property within the district to be ruled out?
Well, so I think it's important to remember too that it's a district, right? It is a neighborhood. It's the downtown business area, right? And so every property is somewhat contributing because it is part of the fabric of that neighborhood. And I think that's something that we do have to take into consideration. If we start nitpicking at specific properties that can be pulled out, you might start pulling out the importance of that neighborhood, and you start kind of degrading, now you're talking about specific individual historic properties instead of historic districts. And that might be something that comes from this, where we want to have very specific historic property designations as opposed to districts itself. So these are all really good questions that are going to come up through the process itself, but I don't think we necessarily need to be, nitpicking each individual thought process right now.
the property, yeah. And I think that we could probably write something into it to broadly allow for some flexibility in certain situations. But I think during the process, that's going to come out on how we can do that. Yes, Commissioner Schuler.
I just wanted to go along with Ryan. This is all TBD, based on the discussions that we're going to have in the future, but I guess they're good points to keep track of. One thing I wanted to clarify is, I think it was Commissioner Beacom asked about whether a property could get out, and your initial answer was no, or could ask to get out, but the subsequent answer seemed to be talking on the other side of that, and I just wanted to make sure and again, it's a TBD question, right? Because it's all going to get down to what area you're talking about, what specific things you want to try and protect, or how you want to try to protect them within an area, right? But I guess just the short answer, in general terms, what's the type of thing that goes into delineating a district and who's all involved with it? Yeah, just really broad brushes. I don't need a lot of specifics.
Yeah, so essentially, back in 2011, we had an intensive survey. So outside consultant coming in, doing about 2/3 of our city, doing property by property. Within that intensive survey report, that consultant created proposed district boundaries. So like for our Clark Street, Main Street Historic District, we copied verbatim that district boundary to be our part of our local historic district. So that's really the guide, is whatever's formulated through that intensive survey.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Then everybody look forward to moving this along over the next 12 or so months. And we'll move on to item number 8, which is the September and October monthly reports. Director?
Not a whole lot to note, with the exception that we did issue the sewer only for the Champion Car Wash on Highway 10. That project, as I mentioned previously, is not moving forward. Everything else is pretty consistent with what we had seen trend-wise in terms of number of permits, valuation, and collected fees. So would recommend approval as presented.
Any questions on either of these months?
Champion's now going into Plover, right? Did I read that?
I don't know, it's not going in Point.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Never
Heard
mind.
anything about going?
No,
They may go somewhere else, but,
Yeah, I think it's Plover.
try to avoid paying attention.
all right. Motion to accept the reports and place them on file.
So moved.
Moved by Schuler, seconded by Arnson. Discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that's approved. Item number 9 is the director's report. Director, report.
Thank you. City closed on the Shopko property last week, so we are moving forward with redevelopment planning efforts there. I would remind this commission that we have scheduled the Special Plan Commission at January 10th at 6 p.m. at Midstate Technical College. More information on that is to come. That is going to be the kickoff for the Downtown Targeted Area Master Planning efforts and then the Shopko redevelopment planning efforts itself. So I think we'll hopefully really enjoy taking kind of a lead and direction on that as we move that project forward. So additionally, from the Community Development Department, happy holidays, and please have a very happy new year, and we will see you again after the start of 2024.
Have we set that, January 3rd yet?
January
2nd, the Tuesday.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to do it the Tuesday?
Tuesday,
January 2nd?
Is our next plan commission.
Is our, yeah. All right, with that, our agenda is exhausted, and we are adjourned at whatever time it says down there.
6:31.
6:30, I'm calling it. Thank you all.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.